I'm Erica Stine. I'm a furniture designer at Urban Outfitters, and you're watching A Student's Perspective.
I'm Courtney, and you're watching another episode of A Student's Perspective. Today I'm here with Erica Stine, and if you like our conversation today, please feel free to hit like, share, and post any comments or questions along the way. Hi Erica, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. Can you just take a moment to introduce yourself and a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm Erica. I'm a furniture designer for the URBN brand right now, working for Urban Outfitters. And I have a background in industrial design, just wrapped up my degree for furniture at SCAD. So I'm a newly minted furniture designer. So I'm just kind of starting out in that, specifically have a background in event production as well. So a little bit of a few different things.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Can you just talk about how you first got into all of that? You mentioned, event designing, furniture, and industrial design. Like, what made you want to pick those as like a career path?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was to be honest, I think it was a lot of uncertainty. I think figuring out exactly what I wanted to do took a while, like it does for a lot of people. But at Carnegie Mellon, it was so tech-based, and a lot of the projects were like medical devices and like world life-saving things, which is great. I kind of wish I had been more interested in that, but I think I was really intrigued by sort of blending the art and design world. I really love the idea of sort of creating these really cool conceptual spaces and conceptual products and telling a story through design. I was really obsessed with David Stark. He's an event producer in New York, and it's kind of a random thing, but I thought his work was so cool because I thought he kind of did that blend beautifully. He created these really cool, like immersive spaces that, he would design everything out of, donated product for, for different charities and things like that. And then at the end, everything would be broken down and donated. And so I just thought that was such a beautiful way of where to put your career and using your, design skills. And so I was really intrigued by his work. And so that's sort of why I went into events. It was sort of a nice blend of both of those things. Got to kind of have my design brain and my art brain. And with events, you kind of get to do some funkier things. People let you kind of do the crazier stuff because it's temporary. So I sort of embraced that, really loved the service design aspect of the event world, loved creating these cool installations, telling the story of your client. But that being said, because it's temporary, all of this work that you're putting into the project is over after a few hours and it's only living on in photographs. And so I kind of felt like I needed a little bit of a change. I wanted to find something that still checked off all of the boxes that I, loved about what I was doing, but was going to be something that was going to last a little bit longer and maybe be a little less wasteful, hopefully. So that's sort of what led me into furniture. I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to go back to school for. Sort of thought about interior design because it does have a lot of similarities to event planning and event spaces and that sort of thing. But after working with West Elm for a few years, I sort of saw all their products roll out and just, thought how rewarding it would be to kind of see your product come to life and then go live in somebody's house and have them enjoy it. And hopefully, in a perfect scenario, they pass it down and so forth. And that story kind of continues. And so that's sort of what led me to furniture. So it's sort of a strange trajectory of things, but that's sort of my story.
No, that's so amazing. I think it's so like refreshing to hear, this perspective within event planning and designing specifically, just because I feel like, kids in design school, students in design school, at various ages, they don't understand or realize how many avenues there are. And this is specifically one that is so flourishing and, like rewarding. Like you said, there's so many different opportunities to be able to be so creative. Like you said, maybe in like a happenstance, and maybe it's not so long term, but it's doing what they might want to be doing, but they don't realize that's an option for them.
Right. And I think I really benefited from taking some time between undergrad and grad school because, when you're in design school, you're sort of in this bubble of like you can do whatever you want and everything seems amazing. But then, that's not always reality. When you're in the job, things change and, you're at the beck and call of your clients and your hours are maybe kind of crazy. And so there's, some of those everyday reality things that hit that you maybe aren't expecting. So, having that experience and kind of getting to try out different things after undergrad really kind of helped shape where my career was going with my grad degree. So,
yeah. So was there at any point in your undergrad career that you were like, I really want to move forward with this? Was there like a specific project or anything that like really gauged your sense that you knew you wanted to move into this field?
I think all of my favorite projects were all the service design projects. Experiential design was sort of just becoming a buzzword, and all of our professors like hated that because they were like, you can't design an experience, like that's a personal thing. You can't, that sort of thing. But it was that I really loved because you can kind of add in all these layers, and I love the storytelling part of it, and just tech did not seem to have that same quality, that kind of emotional quality to it. It just seemed really kind of stark and sterile, and I really kind of loved a little bit more of the blend of the artistic conceptual side. So all of the projects where we were designing a service or using, different types of design work and kind of blending them, I really loved that a lot. We didn't do a lot of furniture, so I didn't really get to have much of a taste of that. But it was sort of the random crazy projects that I loved more so than the designing power tools and stuff. We did one class actually where we were designing. It was this class that was a partnership with the art school, and we were designing a business. And so it was, all these different students from different disciplines. And so we were kind of tasked with designing a business where we could kind of do whatever we want. And so we decided to do a waffle shop, which is sort of strange, but it was in this, nearby neighborhood, and we wanted it to connect with the community. And so we were kind of asking local community members and people who live nearby and people that are businesses that were next door and things like that, what they wanted. And they wanted like a late night waffle shop. So that's what we gave them. And it was like the time of my life. We had there was like a bar next door, and we always had people kind of filtering over, and we would interview them and have them on stage and have different like events. And so every night kind of shaped what the next night was going to look like. And we sort of let the neighborhood and the community members kind of inform what we were doing. And so it's sort of projects like that led me into the event world. I wanted to kind of create these cool experiences, and and I think now with furniture, it's so different, but in a lot of ways, there's so many similarities. It's so art based. There is so much storytelling in furniture. We all have pieces in our house that we love that we're very emotionally attached to. And, I don't take it too seriously at the end of the day. It's a chair, it's a table, but I do like to kind of embed a little bit of that conceptual nature and that storytelling, and creating that piece and within like a space. So
Yeah, no, that's amazing because especially I can tell, between you talking about narratives and really like the community aspect of it, you are essentially like, I will totally support you. You are definitely designing an experience and something that's for the community too. Just it's so well thought out, I feel like, especially when you talk about the narratives and everything that adds into it, bringing in furniture pieces, because I mean, experiential design, you have that social aspect of it. People are going to be, interacting with pieces and objects like that. So yeah, of course, I can definitely sense, how everything relates. And I think that just goes back to the whole conversation we were just talking about how, students might not make those connections and realize how like it can branch out into these larger things. So, which is really exciting.
yeah, and I think too, the blend of art and design, like when you're looking at an art piece, it is like an emotional connection, and the nice thing about adding in a design element that's such as like, a chair, something that you're interacting with, is that whole interaction adds another element to the experience of that piece. Being an art object, you're not interacting, you're not touching it. That physical connection isn't necessarily there, but something like a chair, kind of that story and the lifetime of the piece is shaped by how it's used and the memory that's created around it. And again, I'm not trying to take furniture too seriously, but it's true. Every piece that you're emotionally attached to, that you have this nostalgia for, it's because you have memories with it. There's some sort of attachment outside of the fact that it's just a cool looking piece of furniture. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like that is so important and so relevant within society too, right? Because you see a lot of people that are thrifting and that are, wanting those pieces that have those characteristics of, the way that they're carved or maybe the way that they're made or just the story behind them. You go to maybe a yard sale or something and you talk to somebody that is selling a beautiful chair and you just hear the story behind like how it was, utilized by the previous family or whatnot. And I think that's what really draws people in to bring it into their homes or, into their spaces that they want to use it for, because it adds to that level of, that relationship. It adds to that sense of like love and everything that is going on within that space. And it's so important. I think a lot of pieces that are, just made by like companies that are quickly prefabricated. And of course there's utilizes for it, and there's great purposes that can come from those, but sometimes it's more about like that narrative that you're talking about, for sure.
yeah, I think there's something with age, just being old, we like are more attracted to it. It increases in value just because it has a story, even if it's like a piece of junk. If it's something that looks like it was from an era that, I don't know, it's just something about being old that people just add value to. And I think it's because there's this inherent story that either the story or maybe you don't. And there's that question mark that makes it all the more intriguing. And I think now during the pandemic, people kind of appreciate their stuff more, maybe. Like you said, there's something to be said for inexpensive design and having that accessibility to design. But I think that you can find, that emotional connection with furniture, even at the thrift store, something that you find on the side of the street. I think people are becoming more connected with their stuff because they haven't had a choice. They have to be at home with their stuff. And I think that's part of the reason the home industry has sort of been booming. We've kind of been lucky to kind of have that success despite all the craziness that's been going on. And I hope that continues. I think people appreciate well-crafted things, and they like the story. They like knowing where it comes from, and if it was sustainably sourced and ethically sourced and that sort of thing. So all of those little tidbits kind of add to that backstory of why you're buying something. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that just made me think of going off of what you said was, people are at home, they have their, their objects that maybe they're like either, getting sick of or they're learning to love more so. And I think a lot of the times we see people like repurposing them or reusing them, changing them. And I think that's something that's really interesting too, and kind of taking into consideration how people are adapting those objects for new purposes. And it's kind of like what you were just saying about, taking like a chair, for example, and utilizing that for a specific object. I mean, we within interiors or just in this design world, we obviously gain that sense of, socialness and, use for like sitting or just interacting with one people. But like when you change it and alter it, it's a totally new use. It might become that art piece within the home, or it might become, this like just interactive space within the home. It might not be necessarily utilized for sitting, but it just kind of takes a whole new perspective on everything.
I totally agree. And I think in design school, the amount of times we were told, it has to form follows function, which of course is like the Bible in terms of the design world. And, I totally agree with that. But the amount of chairs that were supposedly coming out of form follows function, and it was like, okay, if you're only following form follows function, you'd have what? One perfect chair, right? So at some point there's an element of art and personality that comes into design. And I think that's something that was sort of denied in a lot of what I learned in undergrad. The art world was sort of like separate. Like it can't be, we're not designing to be pretty or to be beautiful. And I think that, in design, beauty is important. We buy things because we're attracted to them. And I think a lot of that comes from beautiful form in addition to the functionality. So I don't know, it's just something that interesting that I've always kind of come back to is, there's multiple ways, multiple solutions, and it doesn't always have to revolve around the basic guidelines that we've been taught all through design school. So
yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of like a back and forth between, we're always taught to kind of not put aesthetics in the forefront of everything, but I mean, in a more normal general sense, like we're designing for the normal people, the everyday people who might not be exposed to the design world or the knowledge of form follows function, you know what I mean, that sort of thing. So to them it's like, oh, I want something that looks great and is just like so beautiful and will fit the aesthetic of my home and whatnot. So it's like, it's definitely a back and forth, I feel like, trying to like please all or tick all the boxes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think people are becoming more interested in furniture as art. Like I think people are looking at it as more of like an investment piece. Not that it has to be expensive, but it's something that has a little bit more depth to it than an IKEA chair. But an IKEA chair is still a beautiful design. It's just different. It doesn't maybe have the same connection points as a more sculptural piece. And so it's like neither one is wrong, but there's definitely room for both. And so it's interesting to kind of see, in my grad degree, there's a lot of students with an interior design background, and a lot of students with a fashion design or industrial design. And it's so interesting to see how differently they were taught about those different things and how beauty and function kind of come together in different ways, and how different design industries sort of lay out those guidelines. So anyways, it's just been interesting to kind of see how that's transitioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I completely 100% agree. And I think something that you mentioned a little bit earlier was like the sustainability aspect of it. And what I found was interesting is in 2020, you were actually the Red Dot Award winner for your fly ash chair, and that talks about sustainability and all of that. Can you just talk about that project specifically and maybe how you led through it from beginning to end?
Sure. So that project actually started out as just like a hypothetical project for Emiko, just for a design studio class that I had. And so we were kind of tasked with designing a piece of furniture that would blend well with Emiko's line and also kind of follow their brand ethos. They're very sustainable. Everything that they design is meant to last a lifetime. I mean, they started out with the Navy chair, which is this aluminum, like indestructible chair, and it still sells like crazy, and it's a beautiful piece. And so their design aesthetic and their whole backstory kind of follows in line with that first piece. So I really wanted to design something that was going to be built to last and fit in with their design, with their line. Maybe not necessarily aluminum. They have a lot of that already. Trying to think of like a new, interesting material. And then having gone to undergrad in Pennsylvania, where their facilities are actually located, I knew that there was a lot of industry there. And so I started looking into the coal industries and what kind of byproduct could maybe be recycled or used, or, just kind of doing a lot of digging and looking at a lot of different things. And then came across fly ash, and it was just like, seemed like the golden opportunity. It was like perfect. It's this horrible material that kind of is super toxic and is filling all these like gross looking lakes in the area. And it, could be used for cement production. It was already being used. And in the process of it being recycled and made into something new, it seals the material and keeps it from being toxic. So it was sort of a win-win. It's in their backyard. They could source it, locally, and so that's sort of how the design process started. I designed the shape of it purely based on the material. I really wanted to kind of highlight the color and the material, and it kind of felt really industrial, so the shape kind of took on that form as well, kind of like a brutalist kind of thing. And then I also wanted it to kind of blend in well with their aesthetics. That's kind of how it all started. So I'm actually trying to produce it right now. We're kind of working on the mold, and I'm working with a fly ash manufacturer right now to produce it. So we'll see how it goes. We're in the mold making stage, so I'm hoping it'll work out well, but it'll be pretty cool to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, good luck with getting, the mold and everything situated and taken care of, and just producing it. That's amazing. I think that's every like furniture designer's dream, is to have like that long process and then be rewarded by such like an amazing opportunity. So that's really incredible. And I think too, something that's so important with the process that you were talking about is there's a couple actually that caught my attention specifically was, locally sourced materials, just the adaptive reuse of that whole process, and even just taking into considering, the circular economy of materials and taking a secondary material and utilizing it as like a primary source. And that's so important. I feel like a lot of manufacturers might not take that into consideration as much these days, and it's so important for the environment and for just the design industry in general, because I think the more we produce, the more waste we're kind of creating. And in order to kind of gain it under control, we need to start taking and seeing how we can reuse those materials again. I mean, even when you were talking about, event experiential design, like you'd say, it is for a short term, but what can we do with those objects? What can we do with the materials that were used for that? Can we use them for anything else? So that's just really an interesting aspect of it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I think the thing about this chair that's interesting is, it's not taking a sustainable material and kind of continuing that cycle. It's taking an incredibly it's a really destructive material and making it sustainable. So the strange thing about this, chair is that, ideally it wouldn't really exist after a while. Hopefully at some point there won't be any fly ash to be used, which makes it interesting. I think that fly ash material being used for this purpose, it's sort of a Band-Aid. And I feel like my professors would probably cringe at the fact that I'm referring to my design as a Band-Aid. But, I think that it's important to remember that when you're thinking about, designing sustainably, you don't have to think about using every perfect channel to get to that point. I think that sustainable design has always intimidated me because you feel like, oh my gosh, we have to keep the carbon footprint, you know, like very minimal, and it has to be made of this and then break down to next to nothing. And, you know, there's so many things that keep people from designing sustainably because you feel like it has to be perfect. And I think that you know, it's important to kind of bridge those gaps into, you know, hopefully in the future where we won't have to use materials like fly ash to design product. You know, we kind of need to kind of design for those temporary in between moments like we are in now and hopefully in between. And you know, the fly ash chair, it's you know, representative of something too. Like it's a cool looking chair, but it's also, you know, it's physically made of your electrical waste. So it's, you know, I've tried to calculate it out, but it's almost 100% fly ash, and it's about 115 days worth of electrical use if your, you know, lights powered on for 24 hours for 115 days. So it's this physical representation of your electrical usage. So it's kind of interesting to think about it in that sense too. You know, hopefully one day it'll just be sort of this weird relic of this material that doesn't exist. You know, but it's kind of a different way of approaching sustainable design, I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, you know, it's interesting that you know, you say that we're in this like in between period, because I think like, you know, I can definitely understand where you're coming from, and with all of that, because yeah, there's going to be a point where, you know, maybe it's not going to be an available source material or whatnot, but you know, it's kind of interesting because now you're talking about that narrative again. You're bringing that up and saying that this was once part of the history and continuing that progression of that material, but then now it's kind of, you know, once we get to that point, like it's gonna be like that relic, that like highly wanted object that is, you know, just it's there. It's a part of history now, so it's gonna be wanted more and more just as time goes on too. So that was something that I thought was interesting to think about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can only hope that my furniture will be valued like that at some point. That's a dream scenario. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about that this is not something that it's a sustainable solution that's not meant to be sustained, basically.
Yeah, for sure. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit more. Talking about how your work with Urban Outfitters in that furniture industry, how has that process, or you know, the way the mentality in that sort of company progressed from maybe undergrad to grad to now? Is it kind of like, was it a very, you know, continuous fluidity of, you know, progression, or was it kind of like starting and stopping different mindsets?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I started working with a few companies while I was still in school, freelancing. So I was a graduate intern for Salamit and then started freelancing for anthropology and then kind of kept on with a few other different side projects with different companies. And it was a really great way for me to kind of get a feel for different parts of the industry, wholesale versus retail and to the trade, that kind of thing. And you know, there's so many different facets of the furniture industry, whether you're trying to build your own pieces or you're digitally designing for, you know, the masses. And so having a little bit of a taste of different things, I think was really helpful in figuring out, you know, where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And so, yeah, so then I kept working freelance after I was done with school and then eventually decided I wanted to go full time and got this position with Urban. I think I just really crave eventually being in an office with people. And, you know, I think freelance, I would have continued to be, you know, by myself at home. So there's something to be said about the creative process, about just being around other people, you know? So yeah, I mean, it's a new position and I love it so far. I get to work on a lot of really cool pieces, you know, a lot of sculptural stuff. Um, and so it's been really fun so far. Yeah.
That's awesome. And, you know, how did you kind of branch yourself into that position? Like, was it more so like you reaching out to those companies and saying, you know, I'm a designer, these are the kind of, you know, values that I have, and I want to bring that to your company as well? Or how did you start to get into all that? Because I feel like, you know, now with, you know, graduates and, you know, going from making that transition from undergrad or grad to the real world, the real design field, it's a little difficult for some students, and they feel a little bit intimidated, you know, like, so what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, you have to work really hard at making those connections and swallow your pride a little bit and just be really aggressive, even if you feel awkward. Because I know that I have, felt weird about just blindly messaging people on LinkedIn. But, most people are really receptive to that, and they've been there. Everybody's kind of been in that position. And, hopefully they'll be nice enough to at least respond. And if not, it happens. But I would say really take advantage of your alum and, connections of connections. I mean, really kind of reach out. And going to High Point for me, at least for furniture, is, great because everybody's there. That's like the 2 times a year when the whole industry is in one place, and you can really take advantage of trying to set up meetings with people and, bringing your portfolio with you, and being face to face is a really big benefit to kind of making those connections, because it's more personal, it's less, people can hit ignore really easily online. So I think just putting yourself out there and not being afraid to reach out and, try to, shoot your shot and see what happens. And so most people are pretty receptive to that, I think, at least in my experience.
Yeah. And was that also the mindset with, I know you've had a lot of experience with design competitions as well. Was that mostly you looking out and reaching out for those, or were the competitions more so something that you, or everybody, all of your peers did at school altogether?
Actually, that's one thing that I think SCAD does incredibly well. They kind of send things to you. So I'm not, when you're in design school, it's hard to be proactive about that stuff, because you're like, oh my gosh, I have 50 million projects. The last thing I want to do is put together some written summary about my work. And, but SCAD, they'll send, me and, all the other students, like, here, you should apply for this, or your professor said this project would probably work well for this. And so they are like on it, and they send it to you, they make it super easy, and that is huge. I mean, they have done an amazing job with that. It reflects really well on them and of course the students. It's a win-win for everybody, and they are amazing about setting you up with like their PR team. If you win something, they try to connect you with them, and then they'll try to get you published if they can on different platforms. And so that's a huge benefit to them, and they're also so great at helping facilitate those connections too with alum and other industry professionals. So I do credit SCAD a lot to to that. I don't think I would have ever thought I would win a red dot, and I would have never even thought to apply. But I was like, well, SCAD's paying for it, and they're sending it to me, so why not? So it was a huge shock. I did not think I would win. I just didn't think that it was kind of in the realm of possibility as a graduate student. So they kind of really, I owe it to them for forcing me.
It's always so funny because it's always the ones that you don't expect or you don't like anticipate doing, and then it just like works out the best.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It was a great surprise in the middle of the pandemic. It was nice to get that news.
Well, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I guess going off of what you said too was, you know, how, you know, as a student, there's always so many things going on, right? So you have your extracurriculars, you have studio, you have this and that, and like the last thing, you know, we kind of like, it's so bad to say, but the last thing we like want to do is like another thing on our plate. But I mean, it's such great opportunities like that really propel us forward. And I think that's something that students take for granted a lot of the time. They just kind of push it to the side and say, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to like, I'll get to it. And then they never get to it. I mean, obviously I've been there, I've done it, but it's something that you kind of just have to really like propel yourself into and really, take the time for it, because I mean, you're first and foremost an example of it. You'll never know what the outcome can be, so why not put your name out there? And I think some students are obviously get a little bit intimidated by that. So do you have any advice for students in that kind of like position?
I mean, I am that student. I mean, I know the feeling, and especially I think having taken time between undergrad and graduate, you're like, you go back to school and you're like, oh my gosh, I get to do all these things. And in undergrad, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do all these things. And you just appreciate it 10 times more. Like I feel like going back to school, I took advantage of every class, every, tutorial, every demonstration, every, thing that was happening. I was like, I'm there. Like everything that was part of tuition, I was like, I'm doing it. I'm a part of it. And I'm so glad I did, because it led me to a lot of cool experiences, a lot of cool connections. And I think just trying to say yes to as much as you can, and not necessarily more work, because, you got to find the right balance, but the involvement in the school and trying to take advantage of all that they're doing to help facilitate your growth and, your moves in your career and things like that. At least trying certain things out once and seeing how they work for you, because, even after you leave, I still have connections with a lot of the people that I met, through career building and things like that, I still send questions to every once in a while. There's just lifelong connections that you can make at school that will help you your whole career. And so I think just trying to do as much as you can, as hard as it is hard, it is a lot. But just remember that when you're out in the real world, you're going to miss it, and you're going to wish that that is all you had that was going on. I mean, it's different. The grass is always greener, but it is nice to be able to sit in class and through a lecture. I feel like I never really thought that that was something I would ever value. And now I'm like, it's all I ever want to do. So
Yeah. Yeah, especially even going, like you said, from undergrad to grad, I think, thinking about just the process and just adding, more years to your schooling, I think is something that students also get a little bit unencouraged about. They think, they're so burnt out, or, they just need to take some time off with school, and really just kind of figure out, personal ambitions and values, and, just that's kind of a back burner topic, I think, sometimes. But was it something that was really like you knew you wanted to go back to school, or was it something that you wanted to take some time off and get into? Like, do you have any advice on that situation for students?
yeah, I mean, when I left undergrad, I never wanted to go back to school. I was so burnt out. But I think because just finding out what the job that I was interested in was really like, and there was a lot of things that I loved about it. But I think you just learn so much from being in the job, and that's why I think internships and getting experience even while you're in school with things that you're sort of interested in as much as possible is so beneficial, because you just don't know all the questions to ask yet, and you don't know what you're going to value or what you're going to hate, or what might change your mind and make you want to do something different. And so I think doing, just experiencing the jobs that I had, and figuring out what I was really most interested in and what I, wanted for my career, kind of allowed me to kind of get a better sense of what direction I wanted to go in. And I think, honestly, in undergrad, I still don't think I understood what I wanted to do at that point. I don't think I did enough exploring on my own to figure that out. There's so many options as a designer, which is great, but it also makes it really difficult. I remember being in school and being like, oh, I wish I just was interested in like a medical degree or something, because the whole time you're in it, this is what you're doing, and you're on a track. In design, it can go in a million directions, and I'm so grateful for that now, but it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I think just trying to experience as many different, jobs and internships as you possibly can. And if you have questions, just ask people that work in those jobs. And, I think that's sort of what led me back to school. But I think it all happened in the right order. I don't think I would have been able to figure that out had I gone straight into a grad degree. So.
Yeah. And how about talking a little bit about the process it takes to actually physically make, a piece of furniture or an object even when you were in school or, outside now? What does that kind of look like for you? Is it something that you're more digitally inclined to do, or is it something that you really feel that you should, get your hands dirty and physically build it in order to understand that materiality?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the furniture industry is it does get digital really quickly. Most of what I do is digital, but I do love doing hands-on as much as I can, like with clay models or paper, things like that. It's you experience things totally differently when it's something that's three-dimensional. And a lot of companies just don't have the capabilities for somebody to go work in a shop and mock it up. That's like a huge luxury to have that in the real world. So but on the other hand, it's nice to have the flexibility to kind of work from wherever on your computer to do it. And then if you love to build, you can do that in your spare time. I mean, this chair, the splash chair, is like my passion project that I'm doing on the side. So, you find ways to kind of fill those gaps. I do like having, doing the hands-on thing and building. But am I a master woodworker? Absolutely not. I could never build you like the most perfect, amazing chair. Can I build a chair? Yes, but maybe one day. That takes a long time. But yeah, we did learn how to build furniture. I think building a chair is like the hardest thing, and anybody who can build an amazing chair, I really admire their talents because it's very difficult. But it teaches you all the things that you need to know about construction, um, joinery, how things are made and how they're going to be manufactured. So all of that stuff, obviously has a hand in how you're designing on your computer. But it is different. You're not really building unless you go that route and you're working in a shop and you're building your pieces. And so there's different ways you can take it.
Yeah, and is there like any specific like programs that you're more inclined to use when like designing furniture specifically, or anything?
I mean, I always start out sketching. And that's always the first step for me. I feel like if you go straight into SolidWorks, you kind of limit yourself because then you get sucked into like, well, now I feel like I have to do this because I've already started it. So I feel like the process of sketching is always the most important thing for me because it's when I kind of reach the best solution. But then I use SolidWorks pretty much across the board, and then I render everything in KeyShot. I wish I knew Rhino. I hope to one day learn it because you can do so many more of those kind of fluid forms and organic shapes. SolidWorks is a little bit trickier on that front, but yeah, I mean that's kind of mostly my process. So
Yeah, that's interesting. We typically here use Rhino at school, so that's why I was just interested to see like, because there, like you said, there were so many different like programs and things out there that some students might not even know of. Like I have never heard of that before, so I'm really inclined to go and see what that's all about now. So yeah,
oh, what SolidWorks or
yeah.
oh yeah, it's the industrial design software. It's very like boxes and geometry. But yeah.
Yeah, so is that typically what your process looks like when designing maybe like a personal piece? So you start out with sketching and then you work in more of like that sort of process?
Yeah. I mean, always sketching first. I mean, different companies and different people do it differently, but I think when you're designing pieces, no matter what, everybody always wants the same thing, and that is the best end result. So, you kind of have to stick to whatever process works for you. And I think the word process kind of haunts any design student because we're like, oh my God, like the perfect process. Like, oh God, I remember in undergrad when just seeing your professor like going through notebooks and some kids it was like the most perfect pristine sketches, and mine kind of looked like a 5-year-old's drawn it on some of them because I'm just like going through like random shapes really quickly and not doing anything super refined. um, but that's what helps me get to the refined sketches. Like you have to know what actually helps you as opposed to what other people think should help you. And I think that was like the hardest thing for me to kind of get into my head is I have to draw the perfect cube, cylinder shaped things because that's what I was taught. And my sketchbook is way more me than any of my sketchbooks in undergrad because they're more fluid and they have better ideas because it's my real authentic process. So figuring that out took a while, but it's important. So
Yeah, no, that's definitely something I feel is really important to know as a student too, because like you said, there's a lot of the times where professors or, just people in the industry will just say, you have to do it this way. And it's kind of like, it's like forcing something that like shouldn't be forced. You know what I mean? Like it should be more creative and more fluid and it should just happen naturally instead of like forcing everything to be a specific way. And I think that's why we always get stuck in these positions where we're like, I don't know what to do next because this isn't what I anticipated doing, or you kind of get back into the thought process of, oh well, I feel like I'm like in reverse instead of moving forward, when in reality we're just doing what we're naturally inclined to do. So it's really an interesting thing.
yeah, and I don't want to bash the teachings of it. I know you kind of have to learn the rules before you break the rules and all that, but I think getting graded on your process is like always so terrifying for me because it's like, how do I even explore it if I feel like it has to be a perfect line, that kind of thing. So anyways, it's interesting. It's different for everyone, but yeah.
Of course, yeah. And was there anything that, looking back at your undergrad or even your graduate career, was there anything that you wish you knew or like then to tell yourself now, or just kind of like that idea of, oh man, like I wish I did it maybe this way differently or anything like that?
Yeah, I think just if I had known that it was okay to not be 100% on board with what my major was. I think that like there was, at least for us, it was either communication design or industrial design. And everything that I loved went industrial design. So we didn't have that many choices in like, the offshoots of different disciplines and things like that. And so it was kind of, a little bit boxed in of what we were doing. And I kind of wish I had allowed myself to kind of explore different things a little bit earlier on, because I think that I missed out on certain things. I think SCAD's great because you have access to so many different things and you can try out so many different types of classes. Um, and I think that's really valuable for like an art and design degree because there's just so many options out there. I think the second thing would be just to know my worth as a designer. And I think that's true for every young person going into a career. You feel like you have to just do whatever you're told and you do work your way up and that sort of thing, but taking on like unpaid internships and you just kind of feel like you're doing it because you have to, and maybe get stomped on a little bit more easily because you don't know any different. And so I think knowing when to kind of put in the work and, let things slide, but also knowing when to know what your worth is and when, you need to be getting paid more or just getting paid. I was kind of graduated in the age of the unpaid internship, and I actually know a girl that I went to school with who paid several $1,000s to actually intern somewhere in New York. So it was a different situation. We kind of were all doing anything that we could just to get the job. And I think a lot of employers knew that and took advantage. And so I wish I think that's important for everybody to know to kind of know when to kind of stand your ground a little bit in that arena. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, that's some great advice. Thank you. And one last question. I want to talk about digital fabrication a little bit more, just because I feel like now it's such a like important aspect of design school. Like they're always telling you take advantage of the digital fabrication techniques of laser cutters, CNCs, like all of that. Was there ever a time where you were inclined to use those, or had the opportunity to use those, and or maybe like what you would do with those if you had the chance?
You mean what I would do with them now in my job, or?
Yeah, like is there like did you ever have any opportunities or experience with digital fabrication through like laser cutters, CNCs, or even just like 3D printers? And like if so, like have you utilized them in your like career path now?
Sure. Yeah. So I used the CNC a lot when I was in, it was like a dream machine because it could do anything. And that actually is something that a lot of manufacturers use. Um, 3D printing, I didn't use as much because it was just so expensive. And I think a lot of industrial designers use that because it kind of lends itself to what they do for furniture being so much larger. We just weren't using it that often, but it is an amazing thing. And there's so much you can do with 3D printing. I kind of wish that I had projects that really lent itself to that because I would have loved to learn more about 3D printing. But yeah, I think most of what I did was CNC, a little bit of laser cutting. But I mean, I think the most relevant um, thing would be the CNC, just because that's something that is used in furniture quite a bit on a large scale, even for mass manufactured pieces. Um, and laser cutting, you know, I feel like that's something that most manufacturers do, but don't really have to connect to what the designers are doing. They kind of just do that on their own. It's nice to know when I'm designing that, okay, this can be CNC because that's a huge benefit. Like if a manufacturer has a CNC machine, that adds a lot of flexibility to what you can do, which is nice. So yeah, that's probably the most advantageous machine when it comes to what I do. So
Great, yeah. And where can students find you or any of your works, like on social media or any websites?
yeah, I have a website. It's ericasteindesign.com, which rhymes, which is awful. I hate that it rhymes, but it does. So my work is there, so you can check out my stuff there. And then I am on LinkedIn, so if anyone ever wants to reach out to me with any questions or anything, I'm an open book. And like we were talking about earlier, I know what it's like to look for jobs and or need advice or whatever. So I definitely want to kind of pass the baton with that. And so if anybody wants to reach out, please, more than welcome. So
Great. Well, thank you so much, Erica, for taking the time to speak with us at a student's perspective. This is it for the conversation today. Catch us next week as the conversation continues at a